After my father's funeral, my ruthless stepdad demanded I hand over my $30 million inheritance to his son for a business venture. When I refused, he slapped me hard across the face in front of his son, leaving me terrified. But little did he know, I was concocting a revenge plan that would leave him in shock the very next day. My name is Nancy, and I'm a 21-year-old college student living in Dallas, Texas. I never thought that the happiest moment of my life would turn into the most challenging. When my father passed away unexpectedly, he left me a fortune, $30 million, to be exact. This money was supposed to secure my future, to be my safety net in a world that often felt uncertain. But now, it felt more like a burden than a blessing. I lived with my mother, Sarah, a loving woman in her early 40s who had always been my rock. Since my father's death, she had struggled to hold everything together. My father had been her first love, and losing him shattered her heart. I often saw her sitting alone, lost in thought, a distant look in her eyes as she reminisced about the life they had built together. In the chaos of grief, she married Samuel, my stepfather, who was in his mid-40s. Samuel had been in our lives for 7 years, but our relationship was strained. He was charming at first, but as time went on, his true colors began to show. Samuel seemed to care more about his image than about me or my mother. There was a distance between us that felt like an invisible wall. He often made snide remarks about my choices and my future, and it made me uncomfortable. I tried to keep things peaceful for my mother's sake, but it was exhausting. Then there was Eric, my stepbrother, also 21. He and I shared a friendly but distant relationship. We would occasionally hang out, but I could never shake the feeling that he was more aligned with Samuel than with me. I sensed that he wanted to impress his father, and that made me wary of him. Everything changed dramatically one afternoon. Samuel barged into my room, a serious look on his face that immediately put me on edge. "Nancy, we need to talk," he said, his voice low and commanding.
"About what?"
I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. "About your inheritance," he replied, crossing his arms. My stomach dropped. "What about it?" "I think it's only fair that you give the entire amount to Eric," he declared. "He wants to start his own business, and he needs the funds." I was taken aback. "You can't be serious. That money was left to me by my father. It's meant to secure my future." Samuel scoffed. "You're young. You don't know how to manage that kind of money. Eric has plans, and he needs your help." I felt a rush of anger. "You don't know what my father intended. That money is mine, and I refuse to give it to Eric for some vague business idea." Samuel's expression darkened. "You think you can just ignore your family's needs? You're being selfish." "Selfish? This is about my future. I'm protecting my father's legacy," I snapped back, feeling the tension in the air. But Samuel wasn't done. He stepped closer, his voice lowering to a menacing whisper. "You'll give that money to Eric. It's for the best." Before I could react, he raised his hand and slapped me hard across the face. The sting echoed in my ears, and I could feel the heat rising to my cheeks. Eric stood in the doorway, wide-eyed and shocked. I wanted to cry out, to fight back, but all I could do was stare at Samuel, stunned by his aggression.
"Get out."
I managed to choke out. "You have no right to do this to me." Samuel smirked, the satisfaction clear on his face. "I'll give you some time to think about it," he said, turning on his heel and leaving the room. I felt a mix of humiliation and fury wash over me. I didn't understand how a man who had been welcomed into our home could act this way. After that confrontation, I felt like my world was crumbling. I didn't know who to trust anymore. My own stepfather was trying to manipulate me, using Eric as a pawn in his game. I spent hours trying to process what had happened, replaying our argument in my head. The next few days were filled with anxiety. I couldn't shake the feeling that something more was going on beneath the surface. Samuel's sudden demand for my inheritance felt too calculated, too sinister. I decided I needed to dig deeper into his activities. Late at night, when the house was quiet, I began my investigation. I started by searching through Samuel's things, looking for clues that might reveal his true intentions. I rifled through papers in his office, searching for anything that could provide insight into his financial dealings. Days turned into a blur of research and sleepless nights. I uncovered emails between Samuel and a woman named Lisa. They talked about something shady, discussing terms that made my stomach churn. The word cryptocurrency appeared frequently, along with mentions of investments that seemed far too risky. I knew I was onto something, but I needed more evidence. I had to be careful, though. If Samuel discovered what I was doing, I could be putting myself in even more danger. With my heart racing, I decided to confront him. I had to know if he was hiding something. "Samuel," I said one evening, trying to keep my voice steady, "what do you really know about Eric's business plans?" He looked at me, his eyes narrowing. "What do you mean?" "I've been hearing things," I pressed. "Things that make me question your intentions." Samuel's expression hardened. "You're being paranoid. Eric has a good idea, and he needs your support." "I don't think this is just about support," I replied, feeling a surge of courage. "If you're trying to manipulate me, I won't let you." He leaned in closer, his voice low and threatening. "You don't know what you're getting into, Nancy. This is family business, and you need to stay out of it." I felt a chill run down my spine, but I held my ground. I had to protect my father's legacy. As I left the room, I knew I was at a turning point. I couldn't just sit back and allow Samuel to control my life. I needed to gather more evidence to expose whatever secrets he was hiding. The battle was just beginning, and I was determined to come out on top. Days turned into a whirlwind of emotions and sleepless nights. I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare, with my stepfather, Samuel, at the center of it all, pulling strings I couldn't see. The slap he had delivered echoed in my mind, a painful reminder that he would stop at nothing to get what he wanted. I couldn't let him manipulate me any longer. Determined to uncover the truth, I turned my focus to Samuel's shady dealings. I spent every spare moment gathering evidence, piecing together the puzzle of his life. It felt like being a detective in my own home, and I was both exhilarated and terrified. My mother, Sarah, was often distracted by her own grief, lost in thoughts of my father. I didn't want to burden her with my suspicions just yet. She had enough to deal with. One evening, while scrolling through Samuel's emails, I stumbled upon something that sent chills down my spine. There was an email thread discussing a cryptocurrency scheme that seemed highly illegal. Samuel and Lisa were making plans to launch a business that involved laundering money through fake investments. I couldn't believe my eyes. How could he do this? And why involve Eric? I quickly printed the emails, knowing that I had to keep everything discreet. If Samuel discovered what I was doing, it could end badly for me. I stored the papers in a safe place in my room, where I could easily access them later. I needed a plan to expose him, but I didn't know how to proceed. That night, I decided to confront Eric. I thought maybe he would be more open to the truth than his father. If he could see that Samuel was lying, perhaps he would help me expose him. I found him in the living room, engrossed in a video game. "Hey, Eric," I said, trying to sound casual. "Hey, Nancy. What's up?" He paused the game and looked up at me. "I wanted to talk about your dad," I started, carefully choosing my words. "I've been hearing things about his business. I think he might be involved in something illegal." Eric raised an eyebrow, skeptical. "What are you talking about?" "Just things I've found." "I think he's trying to use my inheritance for a cryptocurrency scheme," I confessed, holding my breath for his reaction. He looked thoughtful, but I could see uncertainty in his eyes. "Dad wouldn't do that. He's just trying to help us." "Help us?" I replied, incredulous. "He wants to take my money, Eric. You have to understand that this isn't just about family. It's about the law." "I don't believe you," he said, frustration creeping into his voice. "Why not? You've seen how he acts." I insisted. "If you care about our family at all, you need to look deeper." Before Eric could respond, Samuel appeared in the doorway, a dark look on his face. "What's going on here?" he demanded, interrupting our conversation. "Nothing," Eric mumbled, shifting uncomfortably. "Are you sure?" Samuel narrowed his eyes, glancing between us. "Nancy, you're not causing trouble, are you?" I could feel the tension rising. "I'm just trying to protect what's mine, Samuel," I said, meeting his gaze. You should be the one worried about the trouble you're causing. Samuel stepped closer, his expression threatening. You have no idea what you're talking about. You're out of your depth. I held my ground, refusing to back down. I won't let you bully me, Samuel. This is my inheritance, and I'm not giving it to you or anyone else. With that, I turned and walked away, heart pounding. I needed to act quickly. I couldn't rely on Eric's support. I returned to my room, frustration boiling inside me. I felt completely alone, but I was also determined to uncover the truth. As the days passed, I became more resolute in my quest for justice. I reached out to a trusted friend from college, Jessica, who was studying law. We met at a coffee shop, and I poured out my story to her, revealing everything I had found. Wow, Nancy, this is serious, Jessica said, her eyes wide. You need to gather all your evidence and find a lawyer who can help you. Exactly, I agreed, relief flooding through me. I've already printed the emails, but I need more proof. I want to expose him for what he really is. Jessica nodded, her expression serious. Let's make a plan. We can go through everything you've got and figure out how to proceed. After our meeting, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. With Jessica's help, I began collecting everything I could find related to Samuel's dealings. I searched his office, going through files and documents, looking for any sign of wrongdoing. Each discovery fueled my determination. One evening, while rummaging through his papers, I stumbled upon a folder labeled Investments. Inside were spreadsheets filled with numbers and names I didn't recognize. My heart raced as I scanned the documents, quickly realizing they contained information on multiple cryptocurrency accounts and suspicious transactions. I had struck gold. This was the evidence I needed to show Samuel for who he truly was. With shaking hands, I took pictures of the documents on my phone, ensuring I had backup copies. I knew I needed to act fast. Samuel could easily destroy them if he found out. As I headed back to my room, I felt a mix of excitement and fear. I was finally getting closer to the truth, but I was also stepping into dangerous territory. Samuel was cunning, and I had to be careful. I couldn't let him know what I was planning. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. I could feel the weight of the world on my shoulders. But in that moment, I also felt a glimmer of hope. I was fighting back, and I was determined to protect my father's legacy at all costs. With my evidence collected, I knew it was time to take action. I reached out to Jessica again, eager to share my findings. We met at the coffee shop, the familiar aroma of coffee mixed with my anxiety. I couldn't help but feel like I was walking a tightrope, balancing between my desire for justice and the fear of what Samuel might do if he discovered my plan. Jessica, I found something huge, I said, sliding the folder across the table. This is all the documentation on Samuel's cryptocurrency dealings. He's involved in some serious illegal activities. Jessica's eyes widened as she sifted through the pages. This is incredible, Nancy. With this evidence, we can approach a lawyer. We can file a lawsuit and make sure he pays for what he's done. The adrenaline surged through me. Finally, I was taking control of my life. I want to set up a meeting with a lawyer who specializes in financial crimes, I said. But I need to be careful. If Samuel catches wind of this, I could be in danger. I understand, Jessica replied, her voice steady. We'll keep this under wraps until we have everything lined up. As we finalized our plans, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease settling in my stomach. I had to confront my stepfather soon, but I wanted it to be on my terms, with solid evidence backing me up. After our meeting, I began to prepare for the next steps. I reached out to a lawyer named Mr. Thompson, known for his expertise in handling cases involving financial fraud. After a few anxious days, we scheduled a meeting at his office. Walking into the sleek building downtown felt surreal. The walls were adorned with art, and the air was filled with the scent of polished wood. Mr. Thompson welcomed me with a firm handshake and a reassuring smile. I'm glad you came, Nancy. Let's get right into it. As I shared my story and handed him the evidence I had gathered, I could see the wheels turning in his mind. This is very serious, he said, studying the documents closely. If what you're saying is true, We can build a strong case against your stepfather and his accomplices. The gravity of his words washed over me. I just want to protect my father's legacy, I admitted, my voice shaking. Samuel thinks he can manipulate me, but I won't let him. Mr. Thompson nodded. We'll make sure he understands the consequences of his actions. As we discussed strategies, I felt a sense of empowerment blooming within me. For so long, I had been a victim of Samuel's manipulation, but now I was taking charge. I couldn't help but imagine how it would feel to expose him, to finally show my mother the truth about the man she married. The plan was set in motion. Mr. Thompson advised me to keep my findings confidential and to avoid any direct confrontation with Samuel until we were ready to present our case. I agreed, knowing that this was crucial for my safety. That evening, as I walked home, I replayed the day's events in my mind. The tension in the air felt thick, and I could sense that a storm was brewing. Samuel was becoming more unpredictable, and I could only imagine how he would react when he discovered I was not backing down. Arriving home, I found Eric in the living room, a distraction from my thoughts. "Hey, Nancy," he called, glancing up from his phone. "What's up?" "Not much," I replied, trying to sound casual. "Just studying." He nodded but then added, "Is everything okay with you and Dad? He's been acting weird lately." I hesitated, considering how much to reveal. "Just some family stuff," I said vaguely. Eric looked concerned, but didn't push further. "If you need to talk, I'm here," he offered, his tone sincere. "Thanks, Eric," I said, forcing a smile. But inside, I knew this was bigger than our family drama. It was about justice and protecting my father's legacy. As I climbed into bed that night, I felt a mix of hope and apprehension. The battle was just beginning, and I was ready to fight. The day of the courtroom showdown arrived, and I felt a mix of excitement and dread swirling inside me. I had prepared for this moment for weeks, but now that it was here, I couldn't shake the anxiety creeping into my thoughts. My heart raced as I arrived at the courthouse, a towering building that loomed over me like the weight of my circumstances. Jessica met me outside, her presence a comforting reminder that I wasn't alone in this fight. "You've got this, Nancy," she said, giving my shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "Just stay focused on the evidence, and remember why you're doing this." As we stepped into the courthouse, the air was thick with tension. The waiting area was filled with people, some anxious, others hopeful. I spotted Samuel and Eric seated together, their expressions a mix of arrogance and discomfort. Samuel had always carried himself with an air of confidence, but today he seemed unnerved. Perhaps he sensed that the walls were closing in. When our case was called, I felt my heart pound in my chest. The courtroom was imposing, with a judge seated high above everyone else, looking down with an expression of authority. I took a deep breath, clutching the folder containing all the evidence I had gathered. This was it, my moment to reclaim my life. Mr. Thompson stood beside me, his presence grounding. "You'll do great," he whispered as we approached the plaintiff's table. The proceedings began, and the judge addressed the court. "We are here today to address allegations of financial fraud and manipulation. Ms. Nancy, you may present your case." As I took the stand, I felt the weight of my father's legacy resting on my shoulders. "My name is Nancy, and I'm here to expose my stepfather's deceit," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "Samuel has been using my inheritance to fund illegal activities, including a cryptocurrency scheme." I could feel the eyes of the courtroom on me, curious, skeptical, supportive. I continued, detailing the events that led me here, emphasizing the abuse I endured at Samuel's hands. I handed over the printed emails and financial documents to the judge. These emails show the discussions between Samuel and his accomplice, Lisa. They're plotting to launder money through fake investments. Samuel's expression shifted from confidence to disbelief as the evidence unfolded. "Objection," he shouted, trying to regain control. "This is all hearsay." Mr. Thompson stood firm. "Your Honor, these documents are verifiable evidence of the defendant's illegal activities." The judge nodded, allowing the evidence to be presented. I watched as Samuel's facade crumbled. His bravado evaporated, revealing the man behind the mask, one who had exploited my family's trust for his own gain. Next, it was Eric's turn to testify. I didn't know what he would say, but I hoped he'd finally see the truth. As he stepped onto the stand, I held my breath. "I've been confused about my dad's business," he admitted, glancing at Samuel. "I thought he was just trying to help Nancy, but now I see things differently." Samuel shot him a furious look, but Eric continued. "I don't want to be part of this anymore. I support Nancy." The room fell silent. It was a pivotal moment, one that shifted the tide in my favor. I could see Samuel's anger boiling over as he realized he was losing control not just of the situation but also of his son. As the trial progressed, I felt a growing sense of hope. With every piece of evidence, it became clear that Samuel's manipulation was about to unravel. When the judge announced a recess, I stepped outside with Jessica, my heart racing. "We're going to win this, aren't we?" I asked, my voice tinged with disbelief. Jessica smiled, her confidence infectious. "You've done everything right, Nancy. Just wait for the verdict." When we returned to the courtroom, the tension was palpable. The judge returned, looking grave. "After reviewing the evidence and testimonies presented, I have come to a decision." I held my breath, waiting for the words that would change my life. "Samuel, Eric, and Lisa are found guilty of financial fraud and conspiracy to commit money laundering." I felt a rush of relief wash over me. Samuel's face twisted in shock and anger, while Eric looked utterly defeated. The judge continued.
"I'm an 18-year-old woman who recently received an amazing birthday gift from my paternal grandparents, an international trip to Isabella and a check to cover my expenses. They handed me an envelope with the flight tickets, and I was thrilled. However, the very next day, my parents started pressuring me to give the trip to my older sister, Ava. She's 21 and is considered the golden child in our family. My parents argued that Ava, being an architecture major, would benefit more from a trip to Isabella. They said it would help her understand architectural designs better. I tried to explain that I also had plans to major in literature, making the trip equally important for me. Besides, Ava had already turned down a similar offer on her 18th birthday, preferring the money instead. I pointed out that the airline probably wouldn't allow ticket transfers unless it was an emergency. My parents dismissed this, insisting that they just needed the ticket and would handle the rest. This argument dragged on for days, and after 2 weeks I eventually gave in. I didn't want to keep fighting and felt emotionally blackmailed as my parents reminded me of everything they had done for me, framing this as a small favour in return. Their persistence wore me down. At one point, they even suggested that my trip would be a waste, which hurt a lot. They quickly tried to take it back, but the damage was done. They believed Ava's trip would be more meaningful because it would look good on her resume since she's graduating soon. They argued I had plenty of time to travel in the future, unlike Ava, who would start working soon. Reluctantly, I agreed to give up the ticket to avoid more drama. At least I still had the check. Sadly, I'm used to this kind of treatment, so I wasn't too surprised. I'm not even sure the airline would allow the ticket transfer based on their guidelines. I didn't think my parents could do much, but they figured out a way to bypass the rules. Yesterday, when I was supposed to leave for the airport, Ava took my boarding pass instead. We got a call from the cops saying Ava had been in an accident and needed to be bailed out. Apparently, she tried to take control of the steering wheel in the cab because she thought the driver was taking the wrong route. They lost control and crashed into a tree. Ava only had a few scratches, but the cab driver was seriously hurt with a broken arm and a deep cut on his forehead. He pressed charges against Ava for causing the accident, so now my parents have to use their life savings to bail her out and settle with the driver to avoid going to trial. When I heard this, I blurted out that it was karma for forcing me to give up my trip. I regretted it immediately, as my parents looked shocked and said I shouldn't joke about something so serious. They told me that once words are said, they can't be taken back, and called me selfish for saying such a thing. This made me even more upset because they had been hypocritical, saying that they didn't want my trip to go to waste. Feeling angry and impulsive, I decided to take action. I packed a small bag and got a cab to follow my parents to the hospital. I realized that no matter what I did, my family would never value or appreciate me, so I might as well live my life the way I want. At the hospital, my parents and I arrived almost at the same time. Ava was talking to the cops, trying to explain the accident wasn't her fault, though it clearly was. I wasn't there to talk to her. I went up to her, asked for the boarding pass, and when she looked confused, I grabbed her purse and found it myself. I made a run for it back to the cab, leaving everyone confused. I headed to the airport and, thankfully, made it just in time. I boarded my flight and was off to Isabella. I didn't check my phone for calls or messages until I landed, and only a couple of hours ago did I find out how angry my family is at me. My parents think I was insensitive because Ava had just been in a terrible accident, even though she caused it herself. They seem to gloss over that fact and focus on how I only cared about my trip. Ava is mad because she thinks I stole this opportunity from her, even though she stole it from me first. If anything, I was just reclaiming what was mine. The general consensus is that I need to apologize, but I'm not sure if I should. Ava also messaged me saying our parents would have to use their savings to settle with the cab driver. I know our financial situation isn't great, so instead of enjoying Isabella, I could have saved the money and given my parents the check I got for my birthday. But I chose to be selfish. So, am I the arsehole for taking off to Isabella after my sister's accident? Edit. Hi, I'll answer some of your questions to clarify the situation. First, about the boarding pass. I'm pretty sure my parents or Ava didn't figure out a way to bypass the ticket transfer rules. I think her plan was to get to the airport and wing it. If they had managed something, I wouldn't have been able to board with my passport, as they would have required Ava's. So they didn't have a plan, which worked out for me. Why do I continue to live with my family despite their treatment? This is the kind of treatment I've been used to since I was a child. It's not okay, but my parents' preference for Ava made me feel like I needed to do better to win them over, not that they should treat me better. It was a strange, self-sacrificial way of thinking. I spent 18 years trying to be the best daughter so they'd finally like me, leading to disappointment and frustration. I never wanted to give up, thinking that they'd eventually come around because they were my parents, but that's how a child's mind works. My grandparents live far from the city, away from everything I've ever known. I didn't want to change my lifestyle, even though I often thought I'd be better off living with them. They don't know how my parents treat me, nor does anyone else in the family, because we're good at hiding it. That's why I never considered leaving, but I think I will now. I'm an adult, and I don't need to please anybody anymore. As for my relationship with Ava, we've never been particularly close. I don't hate her, and she doesn't have anything against me. We just don't get along. Regarding my family's financial condition, we're not rich. We're on the lower end of the spectrum since my mum is a stay-at-home mum and my dad is a high school football coach. They often rely on my grandparents for money, and I'm not sure how they plan to handle this situation. If they want more financial help, they'll have to come clean about what they did. That's just how it is with my family. Many of you asked why Ava was in the passenger seat of the cab. Honestly, I don't have a clear answer. It's probably just a habit. She's always chosen that seat during family road trips. It seems like her spot. Ava's a bit of a control freak. She once grabbed the steering wheel from a cab driver because she thought he would drive us into traffic. That ended up causing an accident, so you can see how much she needs to be in control. She even left for the airport almost 5 hours before the flight. I've decided to relax and enjoy my trip. It's unlikely I'll get another chance like this for a few years after I start college. I shouldn't worry about my parents. They're adults and can handle things themselves. It's not my fault they made a bad decision and got hit by karma. It was naive to expect them to appreciate my sacrifice, and I won't let that ruin my fun. I'm having an amazing time in Isabella. I talked to my grandparents this morning and shared everything I've been through at home. It felt good to finally talk about the mistreatment I faced and how my parents favoured my sister. My grandparents were shocked that I hadn't mentioned it before. They were supportive and told me I'd done the right thing. They insisted that when I get back I should come straight to them. They're arranging for me to move in with them and will cover all my college expenses. I don't have to worry about housing or tuition, which is a huge relief. So, after a single conversation with my grandparents, everything is looking up. My parents had already made it clear they wouldn't pay for my tuition, unlike with Ava. Now, I don't have to deal with that stress. I'm excited to head home in a week, but now I'll be living a much better life. Update. My trip ended a few days ago, and I'm now living with my grandparents. When I returned, my grandparents had the guest room ready and had already moved my things from my parents' house. They welcomed me warmly and told me that they'd confronted my parents after our conversation. My parents had called them the evening of Ava's accident to discuss what to do. They didn't want to use their savings for the settlement or risk going to trial, especially since there was dash-cam footage showing Ava caused the accident. The cab driver was demanding a high amount, so my grandparents were needed for help. When my grandparents met with my parents, they first asked about my situation, questioning whether it was true that my parents had mistreated me and even asked me to give up my trip for Ava. My parents initially tried to avoid the topic, insisting that they were only there to discuss Ava's trouble. But my grandparents insisted on addressing my situation, which eventually led to my parents snapping and admitting the truth. They claimed that my behaviour showed I deserved their treatment, saying I only came to the hospital to grab my flight ticket and that I had always been jealous of Ava. They denied ever treating me unfairly, which was a blatant lie. My parents labelled me as entitled and spoiled and said they wouldn't deal with it when I returned. This was all my grandparents needed to hear to decide to cut ties with my parents. An argument ensued, and my parents told them they were free to leave and that they no longer needed their help. They even said they didn't want me back, making it clear that if my grandparents wanted to take me in, they were welcome to. So my grandparents arranged for everything in my room to be packed up and moved to their house, making sure I could settle in comfortably. After hearing all this, I ended up crying. I'd always known my parents didn't care about me, but they were all I'd known for 18 years. Hearing the truth broke my heart. I hope no one else has to go through something like this. I'm really grateful my grandparents have been there for me. Now, I'm settled with them, and this is my new home. I'll start college in a couple of months, but until then, my grandparents have promised to support me. Even after college, they'll cover all my expenses. I haven't had any contact with my parents or Ava since I returned. I avoided their messages while trying to enjoy my trip. Today, I finally checked them, thinking I was in a better place mentally. I'm glad I didn't check earlier because it would have been another emotional blow. Ava's messages were the same old accusations: selfish, entitled, spoiled. She's glad to be rid of me, claiming I don't deserve her company. I think she's got it twisted. She's the one who doesn't deserve mine. But honestly, it's my parents who hurt me the most. Their messages were no surprise. They called me heartless and said they failed to raise me right. They even blamed me for leaving the hospital to go on my trip. I didn't respond to that. They sent another long message, upset that I complained to my grandparents about how I was treated. They claimed they gave me a comfortable life, and I had no right to complain. They said I was just jealous of Ava and called me a waste of their time and energy. That really hit me hard, and I almost cried. But after talking to my grandparents, I promised myself I wouldn't let their harsh words get to me, so I didn't cry, but I did block them to cut off all access. I'm starting my healing journey and trying to move on. I need to erase all traces of them from my mind if I want to live my best life. I'm not sure if it's possible, but I'm going to try. Update. The funniest and craziest thing happened today. It's been nearly 2 weeks since I got back, and I haven't kept up with what's been going on with my parents and Ava. I assume they're still struggling with the settlement. This afternoon, my parents showed up at my grandparents' house, clearly in a vengeful mood. When my parents arrived, they didn't acknowledge me at all. They walked past me and went straight to the living room to sit with my grandparents. I stood there, unsure of what to do, but my grandparents invited me to join them. They knew my parents wouldn't be happy about this, and I could see it on their faces. But if they were upset, they didn't say anything. Once we were all seated, my grandparents asked why they were there. My parents had previously made it clear they wanted nothing to do with my grandparents because of their support for me. They said they would stick to that, but had some issues to settle first. They presented a document with calculations claiming that they'd spent a huge amount raising me. They expected my grandparents to reimburse them for this amount, as they were now responsible for me. I was stunned by the ridiculous demand for almost $120,000 and had no words for how low this was. It felt like they were trying to make us feel small. My grandparents asked for a moment alone and left to discuss it privately. There was an awkward silence with just me and my parents in the room. They refused to acknowledge me, which was uncomfortable. When my grandparents returned, my grandpa remained calm and polite. He agreed that they would repay the amount my parents claimed, but only if my parents repaid all the money they had borrowed from my grandparents over the years. My parents were taken aback and looked like deer caught in headlights. I had to leave the room to avoid laughing at them. I stayed upstairs until they left. When I came down, my grandparents told me that my parents tried to argue but eventually resorted to cursing us out before leaving. I doubt they'll be back any time soon after this humiliation. Even if they do come back, my grandparents have shown they can handle them. With me heading to college in a couple of months, I'm looking forward to that. Going to Isabella was definitely the best decision I could have made.
My parents left me a $100 million penthouse, but on my very first day there, my mother-in-law barged in, showing fake documents claiming the apartment was hers. When I tore them up, she slapped me hard, threw me into a car, and dumped me at a remote bridge, telling me to go to hell. I barely survived, but I returned, ready for revenge, and what happened next shocked her to the core. I never imagined my life would change in such a brutal way, not in a million years. It all started with the inheritance. My parents, who had always been the anchors in my life, passed away in a tragic accident. It was hard to even process, and in the middle of my grief, I was left with the most unexpected thing, a penthouse apartment worth $100 million in the heart of New York City. I remember standing in the penthouse for the first time after the funeral, my hands trembling as I ran them over the polished surfaces, the view of the skyline stretching endlessly before me. This place, filled with so many memories of my childhood, now felt like a heavy burden. It wasn't just a house, it was home, a place where my parents had raised me, a place that had witnessed my growth, my dreams, my failures. Now it was mine, but I didn't know how to hold on to it, not just physically but emotionally. I was lost in grief. Then there was Daniel, my husband, the one person I thought I could lean on during the darkest time of my life. Daniel, a 32-year-old marketing executive, had always been supportive, or so I thought. We had been married for 3 years, and I had envisioned us building a life together, sharing this home, and making it our own. My dream was to turn this penthouse into a warm, welcoming space, something that had always felt out of reach as a child. The idea of decorating every room, painting the walls in colors that would carry our memories, of one day hearing the sounds of children laughing, filled my thoughts with hope. But things changed. Daniel's family, his mother, Eva, and his sister, Claire, began to show a keen interest in the penthouse. At first, I thought it was harmless. They expressed their excitement about the inheritance, and I assumed they were just happy for us. But over time, it became clear that their interest wasn't as innocent as it seemed. I started to feel uneasy around them, like something was shifting, like they were more focused on the property than on my well-being. One afternoon, I was in the living room, sitting by the large windows that overlooked the city. I was sketching some ideas for how to renovate the penthouse, trying to ease my mind and find a way to move forward. The light was perfect, and for a moment, I let myself believe that this place could become a home again. Then, the door slammed open, and I looked up to see Eva and Claire standing there, their faces hard and unwelcoming. "Kara," Eva's voice was sharp, demanding. "We need to talk." I felt a cold shiver run through me as I stood up. My heart began to race, a sense of dread creeping in. What was this about? They had never barged into our home like this before. Eva's eyes were cold, and Claire's face was twisted in something between a sneer and a grin. They were holding papers, and I instinctively knew that whatever this was, it wasn't good. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to steady my voice, though I was already growing anxious. Eva didn't answer immediately. Instead, she shoved the papers into my hands. They were documents, legal-looking, professional. I glanced at them, my eyes scanning the words, but the more I read, the worse I felt. My stomach dropped. The documents weren't just some papers about property taxes or bills. They were fake legal documents, documents that claimed the penthouse was Daniel's family's property. The words felt like they were smacking me in the face, impossible to ignore. "What is this?" I demanded, my voice shaking as I looked up at them. "You can't just say this house belongs to you." Eva smirked, crossing her arms. "It's true, Kara. According to these papers, this penthouse now belongs to Daniel's family. You need to move out." I turned to Daniel, hoping, no, praying, that he would speak up, that he would stop this madness, but instead, he stood there, silent. His arms were crossed, and his face was expressionless, as if he were a stranger standing in the room with us. My heart sank. "Daniel, please," I said, my voice cracking as I reached out to him. "Please tell me this is a mistake. Please say something." But he didn't. He just stood there, cold and unmoving. The man I loved, the man I had married, wasn't there. It felt like he had disappeared, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. "Daniel?" I asked again, desperate.
Please, tell me you don't believe this.
Eva stepped forward, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Kara, this is for the best. You don't need this house. You don't need this burden. Let us take care of it." A surge of anger rushed through me. I couldn't let them take everything from me. Not after everything my parents had built. Not after the dreams I had for this place. This penthouse, filled with so many memories, was the last piece of my family I had left. And now they were trying to rip it away from me. "This is my home," I shouted, my voice rising in frustration. "I won't let you take it." Before I knew what was happening, Eva slapped me across the face. The sting of her hand on my cheek was nothing compared to the shock I felt. I stumbled back, my head spinning. I had never been hit like that before, not by anyone, let alone someone in my husband's family. I felt betrayed, devastated. The woman I thought was family, the woman who had been welcoming to me at one time, had just struck me. "Enough!" Claire yelled, emboldened by her mother's aggression. "Get out of here. This place belongs to us now." I couldn't move, frozen by the pain, the confusion, the betrayal. They started grabbing my things, my personal belongings, my sketches, anything they could find, and throwing them out of the door. I watched in shock as my life was tossed onto the street, like it didn't matter, like I didn't matter.
"Leave."
"Now," Daniel's mother barked, her words cold, final. I turned to Daniel one last time, my heart breaking. "Please help me. I begged. Please, don't let them do this. But Daniel just stood there, still silent, his eyes avoiding mine. And in that moment I realized I had no one. Not anymore. They forced me into a car, driving me out of the city, away from the place I had once called home. They left me at a remote bridge, the cold air stinging my face. Go to hell, Kara, Eva spat, as she slammed the car door. There I was, alone, devastated, and betrayed by the one person I had trusted most in the world. The cold air hit my face like a slap as I stood alone on the bridge, the sounds of the car speeding away echoing in my ears. My knees felt weak, and I could barely stand. I had never imagined that I would end up here, abandoned by my own husband and tossed aside like I meant nothing. I looked down at the empty street, surrounded by nothing but silence. The city I once loved now felt so distant, so foreign. How had everything gone so wrong? I didn't know how long I stood there, staring into the emptiness, trying to piece together the shattered fragments of my life. But somewhere in that darkness, I felt something flicker within me, a small, barely visible spark. It wasn't defeat. It wasn't the overwhelming sadness that had taken over me when I first realized what was happening. No, this spark was something else. It was anger. It was determination. They had taken everything from me, my home, my belongings, my dignity, but they hadn't taken my will to fight. I wasn't going to let them win. I wasn't going to let them destroy me. I was done feeling like a victim. I was done being passive. I managed to make my way back to the city, feeling the weight of every step, but knowing that I had to keep moving. I didn't know where to go, or what to do, but I knew I couldn't go back to that penthouse. Not after what had happened. The place that had once felt like home now felt like a prison, haunted by betrayal. The first thing I did was reach out to someone I trusted.
Ethan.
He wasn't just a lawyer, he was an old college classmate. We had lost touch over the years, but when I needed someone, I remembered him. He was smart, dependable, and had become a successful lawyer. I didn't know where to start, but I knew that he could help me. When I called him, I could hear the concern in his voice even before I explained what had happened. Kara, what's going on? You sound like you've been through hell. And I had. But there was no time to dwell on the past. I needed to focus on what came next. I told him everything, the inheritance, the documents, how Daniel's family had forced me out of the penthouse, and how Daniel had stood by, silent, letting it happen. He listened patiently, and then said something that gave me hope. You're not alone in this, Kara. You have the right to fight for your home, your life. We can prove that those documents are fake. We'll take them to court. It was the first time since everything fell apart that I felt a glimmer of hope. Ethan was on my side. He believed in me. And that was all I needed to hear. We set to work quickly. I gathered every document I could find. My parents' will, the deed to the penthouse, and anything else that proved I was the rightful owner. I even made notes about what happened on that day when Daniel's family barged in and forced me out. Every detail was important. I knew they were trying to take everything from me, but I wasn't going to let them. It was hard, emotionally, physically, mentally. Each day was a battle, as I tried to pick up the pieces of my life, and each new document I uncovered only fueled my anger. Daniel's silence still haunted me. How could he just stand there, letting his family tear my world apart? It was like he wasn't the man I had married. I couldn't make sense of it, and I didn't know if I ever would. I knew I had to file for divorce. As painful as it was, there was no way I could continue living with a man who had betrayed me so completely. I wasn't going to share a life with someone who allowed this to happen. It hurt more than I can say, but it was the right choice. I needed to sever all ties with him and take control of my life again. As Ethan worked on the legal paperwork, I focused on getting stronger, mentally, emotionally, physically. I had no idea how long this would take or how much it would cost, but I knew that I had to do this. It was no longer about just reclaiming the penthouse. It was about reclaiming my life. The penthouse was only a symbol. I wasn't just fighting for the property. I was fighting for my identity, my dignity, and my future. The court date loomed ahead, and with each passing day, I felt more nervous and determined. I was going to stand in front of that judge, and tell them my story. I wasn't going to let Daniel's family take what was rightfully mine without a fight. I didn't care how much power they had or how deep their pockets went. I was ready to take this battle to the very end. But deep inside, I knew that this was only the beginning. The fight for my penthouse would soon become the fight of my life. The days leading up to the court hearing felt like an eternity. My mind was a constant swirl of emotions, anger, sadness, determination. But through it all, I held on to the one thing that mattered. I wasn't going to back down. I had come too far, fought too hard to give up now. Ethan had been a steady presence in my life during these dark times. He worked tirelessly on my case, gathering evidence, reviewing documents, preparing me for what I would face in court. His support was invaluable, and honestly, it made all the difference. He wasn't just my lawyer anymore. He was my rock. And through everything, I began to realize something. I wasn't just fighting for my home. I was fighting for me. I was fighting for my life, my future. The day of the hearing arrived, and I barely slept the night before. I was up early, going over my notes one last time, mentally preparing myself for what was about to come. I had to remain calm, focused. There would be no room for doubt. I stepped into the courtroom with my head held high, trying to project confidence even though my heart was pounding in my chest. I couldn't help but glance around the room. There was Daniel, sitting with his family, his face a cold mask of indifference. My breath caught in my throat. How could he sit there, so detached, while his family had done all this to me? I thought I knew him, but the man I saw sitting there was a stranger. Eva and Claire were sitting beside him, their expressions twisted with resentment and arrogance. I could feel their eyes on me, their silent judgment. But I refused to let them intimidate me.
This wasn't about them.
This was about me and my right to stand up for what was mine. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up, my legs shaky but my voice steady. I told the court everything. The way Daniel's family had forced me out of my penthouse, the forged documents they had presented, the lies they had spread. I described in detail the day they had stormed into my home, how they had thrown my belongings out onto the street, and how Daniel had stood by, silent and unhelpful. Your Honor, I said, my voice trembling but determined, I have lived in that penthouse my entire life. It is not just a property, it is a part of me. It's filled with the memories of my parents, of everything I've lost. I refuse to let anyone take it from me. The silence in the room was deafening as I spoke. I could feel the weight of my words hanging in the air. And then I turned to Daniel. I locked eyes with him, and for the first time, I saw something flicker in his gaze. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't remorse. It was fear. He was scared, not of the consequences of his actions, but of losing me. But it was too late for that. As I finished my statement, I glanced over at Ethan, who gave me a small but reassuring nod. I knew I had done my best. The rest was in the hands of the judge. The judge's eyes never left me as I finished my testimony. He asked a few questions, then turned to Daniel and his family. The look on their faces was a mix of frustration and anger. They knew they had no leg to stand on. The evidence was clear. The documents were forged, and they had no claim to the penthouse. And then the judge spoke. The words I had been waiting for, the words that would change my life forever. After reviewing the evidence presented, the judge said, I hereby declare that Kara is the rightful owner of the penthouse. The claims made by Daniel's family are false, and the documents provided were fraudulent. My heart leaped in my chest. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. I had won. The penthouse was mine. But the next part of the judge's ruling sent a chill down my spine. As for Daniel, the judge continued, he is found guilty of fraud, conspiracy, and attempting to illegally seize property. Based on the severity of these crimes, I am sentencing him to a long prison term. I didn't feel victorious in that moment. I felt hollow, like I had lost something irreplaceable. But I also felt something else, relief. The battle was over. For the first time in months, I could finally breathe. As I left the courtroom, Ethan was by my side, his presence grounding me. I had reclaimed my life, but it had come at a heavy price. Daniel's betrayal still stung, and the man I once loved was now facing the consequences of his actions. But I had won. I had taken control of my life again. It wasn't the end of the road, though. I knew that. I had a long way to go before I could fully heal, before I could truly move on. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could. It wasn't over, not yet. The judgment was delivered, and the case was settled, but my journey of healing had just begun. As I walked out of that courthouse, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I had fought, I had won, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. But there was something else beneath the surface, a profound emptiness. The life I had once dreamed of with Daniel was gone. I couldn't deny it. No matter how much I had hoped to rebuild that connection, the truth was undeniable. Daniel was gone. I was done. The man I had loved, the man I had shared my life with, had betrayed me in the worst possible way. He had sided with his family, letting them take what was mine, and remained silent when I needed him most. The silence in the courtroom, his lack of remorse, his detachment, it told me everything I needed to know. But in that emptiness, something powerful began to grow. I was no longer just a victim. I wasn't the woman who had been forced into the car and left on a bridge, abandoned by the people I trusted. I had taken control of my life. I had reclaimed my penthouse. I had stood up for myself when everyone else turned away. I decided to focus on what mattered. I had a future to rebuild, and I wasn't going to let anyone or anything stand in my way. The penthouse, once a symbol of betrayal, was now my sanctuary. Slowly but surely, I began to renovate, transforming it into a place that was truly mine. I hired contractors, reimagined each room, and added touches that reflected who I was now, strong, independent, and ready for whatever came next. The place began to feel like home again, a safe space where I could heal, where I could be myself. Throughout all of this, Ethan was by my side. He had helped me fight this battle from the very beginning, but somewhere along the way, something else had blossomed between us. His support, his unwavering belief in me, it went beyond just the legal case. We spent more time together, talking late into the night, sharing stories of our past and hopes for the future. And in those quiet moments, I realized something important. I wasn't alone anymore. I had found a true partner in Ethan. It wasn't just about gratitude anymore. I had started to care for him deeply, and it was clear that he felt the same way. The connection we shared grew stronger, built on mutual respect and shared experiences. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was allowed to be happy again. Not just for myself, but with someone who truly understood me. One evening, as we sat together on the balcony of the penthouse, looking out at the city lights, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in a long time. I had reclaimed more than just my property. I had reclaimed my sense of self, my dignity, and my future. And Ethan, who had helped me every step of the way, was there with me, not just as my lawyer, but as the man I had come to love. As the renovation on the penthouse neared completion, Ethan and I made a decision that would change everything. We got married. The place that had once felt like a battleground, a place filled with memories of betrayal, was now our home, a symbol of resilience, love, and the strength to overcome anything life throws at you. Looking out at the skyline that evening, I felt a deep sense of contentment. I had faced betrayal, and I had come out the other side stronger. My journey was far from over, but I knew that with Ethan by my side, we could face whatever the future held. The power to shape my destiny was mine, and
Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
The unsuspecting wife didn't know her husband was craftier than she was, and this is what came of it. Today's story has a similar plot. Enjoy watching it. The difficulties began on October 15th, 2010, at 7:30 a.m. I was at Wilcox Airfield waiting for my flight to Nassau when two men in ill-fitting suits approached me. They stopped in front of me, and I looked up from my iPad at their two impassive faces. "Mr. Kavanaugh, would you like to come with us?" asked one of them politely. "You're welcome," he added. "Who are you, and what do you need from me?" I asked. "I'm Special Agent Washington, and this is Special Agent Brown." We're from the FBI, the second man replied. Can I see your ID? I asked. They pulled out their laminated badges, and the photos matched. Since I had no idea what a real FBI badge looked like, I took their word for it. I'm afraid we're here to arrest you, Washington said. You are charged with insider trading by the Securities and Exchange Commission. Will you come with us, please? I stood up and followed them down the hallway and through a door into a room with a table and 4 chairs. They informed me of my rights and put on handcuffs. Really? I thought. They're going to march me through the airport in handcuffs for insider trading? It turned out that this was only half true. They let me take my jacket to hide the handcuffs from prying eyes. They took my iPad, transported me to their headquarters, and put me in another room with only 3 chairs. 30 minutes later, Agents Washington and Brown came in and sat down. They read out a list of charges. According to them, I was involved in a hacking scheme to obtain corporate press releases before they were published and was part of a group that made over $100 million from our activities. They wanted to ask me some questions. Sorry, agents, I said. I intend to remain silent and would like to speak with a lawyer. They tried to convince me that it would be in my best interest to answer their questions, but I stood my ground. These agents were not my friends, and I intended not to answer any of their questions. They took me to a table and allowed me to use the phone. I asked for a telephone directory because I didn't know any lawyers. They gave me the directory, and I looked through the impressive list. I didn't have the slightest idea who to choose, so I picked a beautiful ad at random. A man answered the phone, and I told him I needed a lawyer. He asked me about the nature of the matter, and I told him what was happening. He switched my call, and a woman answered. Hello, this is Tyler Atkins, she said. How can I help you, Mr. Kavanaugh? I repeated my story, and she told me to be quiet and that she would be there in an hour. They brought me back to my room, and I calmed down. After 50 minutes, the door opened, and one of the most stunning women I have ever seen walked into the room. She must have been about 6 feet tall, with flaming red hair, the face of a model, and clear, creamy redhead skin. Her eyes were an icy blue, and her legs seemed endless in that skirt. Damn, she was great. She introduced herself and shook my hand. Her fingers were long, slender, and cool, and her handshake was firm. I guessed she was around 40, but it turned out I was mistaken by 7 years. She sat down in a chair and read the list of charges. She looked at me. Mr. Kavanaugh, you have a big problem, she said. Did you do it? Does it matter? I asked. For the purposes of my representation, no, she said. For me personally, yes, it makes a big difference. Well, I didn't do it, I told her. I have never hacked a computer. I don't know how to do it. I have not participated in any schemes, and I have never received press releases before they were released publicly. I would not engage in any insider trading if I could, and I am completely innocent of these charges. She looked at me doubtfully, her eyes piercing my soul. Okay, she said. We will act on these allegations. If I find out later that you lied to me, it won't be nice, you know. Great, I said. Let's see how we can get you out of here. Is there someone you need to talk to? My wife, I said. I'd like to talk to the kids too, but that can wait until I get out of here. Let's see what I can do, she said. She left, and I didn't see anyone for 3 hours. I was about to pee on the floor when Agent Brown walked in with Miss Atkins. I arranged bail for you, she said. You will have to surrender your passport, and you should know that all your bank accounts are frozen. How about my money? Will my credit cards work? I asked. She raised an eyebrow at Brown, who cleared his throat. They're frozen too, he said. You won't be able to use them. Will I get my wallet back? I asked. Yes, all your personal items will be returned, she said, except for your iPad. I'm afraid that one is now evidence, she said. Then the money is okay, and I'm ready to go. Well, as soon as Agent Brown points me to the toilet, I'll be ready, I said. They gave me an envelope with my things, and I went out with her. Come see me tomorrow at 10 in the morning, she said, handing me her business card and calling us a taxi. "Want to use my phone to call my wife?" she asked. I called home, but the answering machine picked up. I left a short message saying my trip was canceled and that I would be home in an hour. I then gave her the phone back. The taxi arrived, and I went home. When I arrived, no one was home, so I prepared something to eat. It was difficult to concentrate, but I managed. I needed to call the kids, find out where Kelly was, and figure out a few things. Daniel and Patricia weren't home either, so I left them messages asking them to call me back. After I ate, I called my boss, John Sinclair. He told me that I was fired and that my personal belongings were packed and sent home. I had lost my trader's license, and he was sure I would never work in the industry again. Moreover, he was looking forward to seeing me receive a long prison sentence. Well, that wasn't good. I was now unemployed and facing criminal charges. Kelly didn't come home that night, and when I called her, the phone went to voicemail. I didn't know if she heard my message or what she heard, but apparently, she left me. Now I was thinking about the children. What did they hear? If Kelly heard, I'm sure she told them. The next morning, I attended a meeting with Miss Atkins. She said that we had a lot of paperwork to do, and it wouldn't be quick. "Mr. Kavanaugh, how are you going to pay for my services?" she asked. "If I am acquitted, it will not be a problem," I replied. "It might be in your best interest for this to happen," she said, laughing. I liked hearing her laugh and decided that I would try to make her laugh more often. "We have a big day ahead of us," she said. "Let's start. What do you think happened, and how are you going to help me prove your innocence?" I asked for a list of names of people involved in the case. She said they hadn't done a preliminary investigation yet, so she didn't really have any details. This would happen as soon as she could meet with the FBI and the SEC. "I'm afraid I have no idea until I know exactly what happened," I told her. "Once I have a clear idea, we will get to work." We discussed a few more issues, and I signed a mountain of paperwork. When we ran out of ink and free signature lines, I went home. I had a dozen messages on my answering machine, surprisingly from Kelly and the kids. They had problems, they were stuck in Boston, and their credit cards weren't working. Well, nothing surprising there. She had some money with her, but it wouldn't last long, and she needed my help. Strange, but the children were with her. Their messages were the same, but neither of them attempted to explain why they were in Boston. The situation was increasingly strange. I had only been home for 5 minutes when the phone rang. It was Kelly. "Hi, Selden," she sounded upset. "Listen, dear, I don't have much time. We're stuck at the airport, and I need my credit cards to work. Could you call the bank and find out what's wrong?" "I'm afraid it won't do any good," I replied. "Kelly, I've been arrested and charged with insider trading. The cards you have won't work." "Is there any way you could send me money?" she asked. "Approximately how much do you need?" I asked. "Just enough to buy tickets home," she said. "I'll see what I can do," I replied. "All our bank accounts are frozen." "Okay, honey," she said. "Please hurry. Thanks for the help." This was the weirdest conversation I've ever had. Again, there was no explanation as to why she and the children were in Boston. No questions about the arrest, nothing. She should have been shocked by every word I said, but there was nothing like that. Perhaps it was due to the lack of time she mentioned. I would answer all questions when she returned. Some time ago, I had rented a warehouse space. I went there and opened the safe in the cedar chest that my mother had left me. I took enough cash to last me until this was all over. I sent money for tickets to Kelly and the kids and drank whiskey to calm my nerves. I sat and thought until I went to sleep, then lay awake for a long time, thoughts spinning in my head. The next morning, I was woken up by the phone ringing. It was someone from Miss Atkins' office. She had conducted a preliminary investigation, and now all the information on the case was available. She invited a computer expert to discuss the information with us, and I was scheduled to show up at 10 a.m. I showered and got ready, then took a taxi to her office. Her computer expert turned out to be a very attractive young woman named Lainey. The trail was pretty cold, and while I'm not a computer expert myself, I do know my way around a computer. Between her and me, we were able to discover enough to start understanding what was going on. It turned out that most of the transactions were carried out when I was not at home. I was in another country on the day of several of the transactions, and I saw how Miss Atkins began to believe in me. "Mr. Kavanaugh, who knows your passwords?" she asked. "Kelly knows the password to my computer," I said. "The IT people at work know my work passwords, as do my bosses. They don't know the password for my home computer." "Does Kelly know your work passwords?" she asked. I shook my head. "No, I don't give them to anyone, not even her." It was obvious that someone, presumably with Kelly's consent, was trying to set me up. But why? Where could Kelly get this information? I had press release files on my computer containing information that would be extremely valuable to investors, but the dates on the files were usually a week before the press releases. This meant that anyone with access to my computer could use this information to make trades before the public knew the news. Most press releases passed through the desk of my boss, John Sinclair, but his deals would be scrutinized. If he had made trades based on these press releases before they were published, he would have quickly been accused of insider trading. So, he apparently funneled information to Kelly so she could make trades without arousing suspicion. But why use my computer? Then I realized it was to set me up. John must have used my computer at work when I was away from my desk. When they showed up on routine checks, it triggered a search on my home computer, completing the setup. I met Kelly 2 years ago at a company party while accompanying my boss, John Sinclair. I was confused because John was married, and not to Kelly. John saw my confusion and immediately gave an explanation. His wife, Lucille, was not feeling well, so he asked Kelly, a family friend, to come to her place. I had no reason not to believe him, and Kelly seemed like a very charming woman. As the evening went on, she seemed to spend more time with me than with John. He even asked me if I would mind taking Kelly home so he could go back to Lucille, and I readily agreed. Kelly explained that she was divorced with 2 children, Daniel, 18, and Patricia, 16, who were spending the weekend with their father. We soon began to meet regularly. I was surprised that we rarely saw her children, and when we did, they were quite hostile toward me. After a whirlwind romance, I proposed to Kelly and was delighted when she accepted. But I was again surprised that Daniel and Patricia did not attend the wedding. "Oh, they're still upset about the divorce," Kelly said. This surprised me. We had been dating for almost a year, and I assumed she had been divorced long before that. I pushed it out of my thoughts for a while and enjoyed the wedding reception. When I got back to the bar, I went looking for Kelly and found her on the dance floor with John. They were dancing too closely for a bride and her guest, so I set down their drinks and walked over to intervene. They both hesitated for a moment, as if I was intruding, but they quickly separated. I took my bride in my arms and danced the next few dances with her. Back at our table, I mentioned to Kelly that she and John had walked too close to the line of what was acceptable for a bride at a wedding. Kelly laughed. "Oh, don't be stupid," she said. "John is just an old family friend. You have nothing to worry about." She made it seem so reasonable, but I noticed that Kelly and John were almost avoiding each other for the rest of the evening. We left the reception and went on our honeymoon. We settled into a more or less normal household routine. Daniel and Patricia were another matter. They didn't even try to act like we were in a relationship, and Kelly just shrugged. "I've finally accepted that this is the way it is and that hopefully it will improve over time," she said. A few weeks later, I came home from work to find Daniel and Patricia sitting in the living room. After receiving only a grunt from them in response to my greeting, I asked, "Is your mother at home?" Silence. I said, "Is your mom home?" I repeated. Daniel remained silent, but Patricia spoke up. "She's upstairs taking a shower," she said. I stood there for a minute, then decided that enough of this nonsense was enough. "Listen," I said, "you clearly don't like me very much, and I guess that's not uncommon in second marriages. But you seem to hate me, and if we're going to be any kind of family, you're going to have to put up with it." The silence continued. Then Patricia spoke. "We hate you," she said, "and always will, because you destroyed our family." "What are you talking about?" I asked. "Your mother was already divorced when I met her," I said. "No, Daniel finally spoke. She filed for divorce only 2 months after you started dating. The divorce was finalized 2 weeks before your wedding. I stood there dumbfounded. I literally had no words. Guys, I'm sorry, but you have to believe me. Your mom told me she was divorced. I would never date a married woman. Yet, Daniel said, that's not what she said. And who should we believe, our mother or the man who destroyed our family? They both stood up and left the room, Patricia running out in tears. Well, I thought. I went upstairs to the master bathroom and pulled back the shower curtain. Oh, Kelly, she laughed, aren't you overdressed to join me? It's not funny, Kelly, I said, barely able to contain myself. The kids just told me you were married when we started dating. Of course, dear. I told you about this, but we were divorced. You didn't say anything like that to me. You told me you were divorced. I would never date a married woman, even if she was divorced. Whatever. We are together now, and that's the main thing. So how about you take these things off and join me in washing my back and front? I was still excited, but what could I say? I'm just a man, and I'm weak, and she's hot. I shed my clothes in record time and jumped into the shower. But the events of that day would stay with me for a long time. Often, when I had a free moment, I thought about what was happening, but usually, I didn't have time to dwell on it. Until one evening, when I was left alone at home for the whole evening. I sat in my office with a glass of wine in hand, and 2 thoughts became clear in my mind. One of the things some people I know have said when discussing guys who date women who cheat on their husbands is, if she cheats with you, she will cheat on you. While I didn't see any obvious signs of Kelly cheating, she had plenty of opportunities, like that night at the bachelorette party. Another thought was about her dancing with John at our wedding. At the time, it seemed more or less innocent, but now I wasn't so sure. Then I remembered how we met when she was at a party on John's arm because Lussel was sick. It was a stretch, but it was all I had at that moment. I decided to take the next day off from the office and called Lussel to see if we could meet for coffee. She was puzzled to say the least, but agreed, and we met at a local Starbucks. We exchanged a friendly hug and a kiss on the cheek, grabbed coffee, and sat down. I was stuck, not knowing how to start a conversation, but Lussel took the bull by the horns. Okay, Selden, she said, you asked for this meeting, so what's bothering you? I took a deep breath and let it out. Lussel, I began, do you remember March 2 years ago when we had that job that you couldn't come to? Well, she said, that's not entirely true. I could have come, but John told me it was for employees only, no spouses. That was a hammer blow between the eyes. What happened, Selden? She asked. You look like your best friend died. Perhaps you are not so far from the truth, Lussel. You know my wife, Kelly. Of course, yes. I was at your wedding. Remember? She was a wonderful bride. Yes, she was. Do you know how we met? Lussel shook her head in denial. She was at the same party. She was on John's arm. He told me she was there because you were sick. I think we both know now that he was lying. I didn't tell her about my suspicions that Kelly and John might have something else going on. I felt like a complete jerk for not telling her, but I didn't want her to confront him until I had all my cards stacked. I made a copy of Pagonia and cloned Kelly's phone, so I now had access to all her calls and texts. It didn't take me long to confirm their romance, but it was other things that made me shiver. Hi John, it's Kelly. Hey, baby. What's the news? Said John. Everything is set on my end. Selden thinks I'm going to a party with the girls, and I've got everything set up with Angela to cover for me. Can you get away from the old chain? No problem, he said. I told her I was taking some clients from out of town for the evening and it would be very boring, just business. I still can't believe how easy it was for me to lure you in. Are you serious? Kelly asked. What normal man could resist you? John said. God knows you couldn't. If I hadn't already been in a state of bewilderment, the next part of their conversation certainly would have done so. Did you make the trades I told you to make? He asked. Yes, of course, she said. but I still don't understand why you want me to use Selden's computer." There was a pause. I could imagine him rolling his eyes. "Because when we make our move, we'll need a scapegoat to take the blame." "Selden," she said. "Yes, Selden," he said. "He'll probably be able to get out of this if he's really lucky, but by the time they figure it out, we'll be long gone." "Have you told the kids yet?" "Not yet, but that shouldn't be a problem. They hate him for ruining our family. When I explain that we're taking his ill-gotten gains and going to live big on a Caribbean island, I don't think they'll be too upset." "Okay, but be careful. Kids can react strangely when they have to leave friends and stuff behind." "Don't worry, I can handle them." "Okay, it's your choice. At the usual time and place?" "Yes." "Goodbye." "Goodbye, Kelly." I turned off the recording and leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes. Damn, what a confusing mess. As much as I suspected their affair, hearing it discussed so openly and coldly and learning that our relationship was a lie shook me to the core. I knew we hadn't known each other that long, but I loved her with all my heart and thought she felt the same about me. Now there was something bigger at play, something illegal that they were trying to frame me for. I didn't know what to do, but I definitely needed more information. If she was involved in such a scheme, she would have to hide the money somewhere, but where? I installed spyware on both my computers, home and work. Almost immediately, I hit the mark. John used early press releases for insider trades and had Kelly execute them from my home computer. Sometimes, he made trades from my work computer. I didn't understand why they used both computers. Perhaps it was to maximize the chances of me getting caught. I wasn't sure if that was their original intention, but it was obvious they were setting me up and using this as a distraction while they made off with their ill-gotten gains. Even more depressing was listening to her conversations with Daniel and Patricia. I knew they hated me because Kelly convinced them that I was to blame for the destruction of her marriage. Forget that, even if it was true, she was the one who cheated on their father. And as I now understand, she had already cheated on him with John. They were very excited when she told them that John had uncovered my insider trading scheme. "That's great," Daniel said. "We can turn him over to the police and get him out of our lives. Maybe you and Daddy can get back together?" "No, kids," she said. "I'm afraid that ship has already sailed. Besides, John and I have another plan. We're going to steal his loot and then let the police catch him. That means we'll have to leave the country for a while, but we will live on a beautiful island in the Caribbean. What about school and our friends? We'll figure something out. Don't worry, we'll have a lot of money. Maybe you can invite your friends on vacation, and once your stepfather is in jail, we can come back." I couldn't tell if the kids really believed it, but there were no more objections. Further tracking revealed that they were transferring funds to a Swiss bank account. Thanks to the spyware, I now had access to this account. I wasn't sure what exactly would happen, but I decided that I would need a ready source of cash. I started making irregular cash withdrawals from my checking and savings accounts, not large enough to attract attention and not always the same amounts. Once I had enough, I hid them in a safe I had in a storage room. I bought a new laptop. When I found out they were going to make their move, I logged into her account and transferred the money to another bank in Barbados. I kept transferring it until it ended up in a bank in the Cayman Islands. Right after I left for the airport, I knew that Kelly and the kids were heading to Bice. John stayed behind. They didn't say why, but I guessed it was to complete my setup. Meeting Kelly and the kids at the airport was another surreal experience. Kelly rushed over and put her arm around my neck, while Daniel and Patricia stood there with the strangest expressions on their faces. Since I spoke to her while she was stuck in Bice, she had never expressed surprise or concern about my legal problems. "Oh, Selden, she said. "Thank you very much." I didn't know what to do. I had no money, and the credit cards weren't working. "Yes, Kelly," I said. "I understand all this, but what were you doing in Bice? We didn't talk about any trips. And why didn't you have return tickets? After all, you probably bought round-trip tickets." "Oh, honey, let's not talk about it now. I just want to go home and relax." We all got into my car and headed home. "Okay, Kelly, I understand," I said. Little did she know how well I understood everything. We hadn't been home 15 minutes before she called John. "Oh, John," she cried. "It was terrible. I went to the bank just like you said, and there was no money." "What do you mean there wasn't?" "Exactly what I said. The account was closed and the money was transferred to a bank in Barbados. When I called the bank, they didn't tell me anything because I didn't have the right access codes." "You didn't do anything, did you, John?" "Of course not," he said. "Why would I do that?" "I don't know," she said. "But you better hope I don't find out you did it." She hung up. Things turned out even better than I had planned. I sowed the seeds of mistrust between them, which could only help my plans. Kelly came back into the room looking innocent and worried, even though I almost believed her. "So tell me, Selden," she said. "What is this story about the arrest and insider trading?" "I wish I knew, Kelly," I said. "I was at the airport waiting for a flight to Nassau when 2 FBI agents approached me and arrested me." "But for what?" "It looks like they found some early press releases on my computer with deals based on information from them. I have no idea why they checked my computer in the first place, let alone how the information ended up there." "You did it?" she asked. "What?" "Of course not, Kelly. You know me better." "I'm sorry," she said. "I should have asked. So how did the information end up on your computer?" "This is where things get interesting," I said. "Most of the computer activity happened while I was out of town." Kelly was a little taken aback by this, but quickly recovered. "So how do you think it ended up there?" "Well," I said, "that's the $64,000 question, isn't it?" "What do you mean?" "I think it's obvious. Do you have any idea how this could have happened?" "Of course not, Selden," she said. "Where would I get this kind of information, let alone know what to do with it?" "Okay, Kelly, I believe you," I said. "We'll just have to wait for the investigators to finish their work." "Yes, of course," she replied. I believe you only as much as I can throw at you." Her eyes darted nervously, and I could smell the fear. As I left the room, pulling my phone out of my pocket, I almost immediately received a signal that she was making a call. It did not surprise me that it was John Sinclair. John," she said as soon as he answered. "Selden knows." "I don't know how he knew, but he knows." "Calm down, Kelly," he said. "There's no way he could know anything. If he knew, he would have already called the police on us." "You're probably right," she said, "but something strange is happening." "And where did the money go?" "If you didn't take it and I didn't take it, then who?" "I wish I knew, Kelly. I wish I knew." My next meeting with Miss Atkins was quite interesting. She met with the prosecutors, and although they agreed that the evidence seemed to exonerate me, they still weren't sure I wasn't somehow involved. This was not entirely unreasonable, given that the trades were carried out on my computer. Things were further complicated by my growing attraction to Miss Atkins. I obviously thought she was beautiful at first sight, but as we worked together on my case, her pure intimacy overwhelmed my senses. She had the personality and intelligence to match. She gently rebuffed all of my attempts to go beyond a professional relationship, and when I persisted, she reminded me that I was her client and it was unethical for her to enter into a personal relationship with me. I tried to argue that this would only make her work harder for me, but she just laughed and shook her head. I didn't know how I would do it, but I was determined to win against this woman. Kelly was brought in for questioning, and I learned through the grapevine that she was still trying to pin the blame on me. Then she came to me in tears. "Selden, please, you must know that I am innocent. I would never try to set you up. I love you." I barely had the strength not to laugh in her face. "I know, Kelly. I know. Do not worry, everything will be fine. Is there some way that someone else could be on my computer? Was there someone in the house? I don't know if she cheated on me in her home, but I couldn't figure out why not." "No, Selden," she said. "Of course not." God, how I felt like a villain, but it was so right. She definitely deserved everything that happened to her. Maybe it was the children, they always hated me, blaming me for ruining your marriage. Kelly was so shocked that it took her several minutes to respond. "This is absurd, Selden," she said. "Even if they hate you as much as you say, where could they get such information?" "Well, if it wasn't them and no one else was here, then it had to be." Kelly covered her mouth and ran out of the room. The police continued to bring Kelly in for questioning, but they simply had no evidence other than that the transactions were made on my computer. There was no evidence that she made them. When investigators discovered that all the press releases had passed through John's desk, he was also called in for questioning. But he refused to answer questions. An anonymous call tipped them off to his relationship with Kelly, and a search of phone records confirmed it. Her one-way trip to Bice and bank records confirmed their fate. It didn't take them long to get Kelly to cooperate with John. Their trials were almost a formality. The evidence was overwhelming, with Kelly's admission to her role in the scheme. Kelly threw herself at my feet. "Please, Selden," she said. "You must believe me. I never wanted to do this. I was forced. Give me peace." "Kelly," I said, "I know everything. I know you cheated on your first husband with John, and you and John were together when you seduced me. I'm not sure if you planned to use me in your scheme from the very beginning, but that doesn't matter anymore. It's over, Kelly. And it looks like Daniel and Patricia will get their wish to be with their father, although not with you. I don't think you'll have a problem getting custody when their mother is a convicted felon." Kelly simply burst into tears when the bailiffs came to take her away. Since neither she nor John were willing or able to return the money, they were not eligible for a reduced sentence. She will have to serve 5 years, and John will have to serve 10. The children never wanted to talk to me before leaving with their father. They still blamed me for the destruction of their family, and I think they blamed me for Kelly's arrest as well. Tyler was able to get my arrest annulled and my trader's license reinstated. Even though I had no intention of returning to my old company, Tyler invited me out for drinks to celebrate our victory, and I was only too happy to accept. After our drinks were served, I got right down to business. "So, are we done? Case closed?" "Yes," she said. "You are free." "Great," I said. "You're fired." She almost choked on her drink. "What? Why?" "Well, you told me about some ethical rules about dating clients." "Yes, I have such rules, but I don't understand how." Suddenly, a spark of understanding lit up in her eyes. "I must be the stupidest woman on the planet," she said, "especially for a lawyer. I just didn't realize it until now. Now that you've figured it out, what do you think? Do we have a chance?" "There's always a chance," I said. "I just honestly didn't think of you that way," she replied. "I feel the same," I said. "But we did not meet under other circumstances. We met as attorney and client, and you were accused of a serious crime." "But I was innocent," I protested. "I don't want to get into the legal stuff," she said. "The police decided they didn't have enough evidence to pursue charges against you. Plus, they had more evidence against John and Kelly. It's not quite the same as being innocent. To quote Dickens, the law is in 5th place." I smiled as Tyler laughed her charming laugh. "This isn't the first time I've heard this, and I'm not saying it's not true, but that's the way it is. You still haven't answered my question. Will you go on a date with me?" "You're persistent," she said. "Okay, I'll go with you, but I'll tell you in advance that things won't go any further until we've had some very serious conversations. My inner sensor tells me that you still haven't told me the whole story, and I'll get it out of you one way or another." My ears perked up at this. What did she know or think she knew? "You may well try," I said. "I'm sure you can be very persuasive." She just gave me a knowing smile and a wink as we agreed to dinner on Friday and parted with a warm handshake and a kiss on the cheek. When Friday evening arrived and we had dinner, the conversation was pleasant, but there was tension throughout the evening. Tyler had her suspicions about me, and I was worried about hers. I received a much warmer kiss goodbye, but that was all. Our second and third dates were more passionate, but there was still a barrier between us. I was torn. I knew I was in love with Tyler, and I believed she loved me too, but she couldn't give herself completely to me while I had part of myself from her. I was afraid that if I opened up to her, I might lose her. We continued to meet regularly, but there was always an elephant in the room. In our conversations, sometimes I felt like I was being cross-examined. This seriously complicated our relationship. Tyler refused to deepen it because she wasn't sure of me and believed that trust was critical to any relationship. Given my experience with Kelly, I could understand her concerns, but I could never muster the strength to fully open up to her. It all came to a head as we made out on her couch. Things were about to get very hot when she slammed on the brakes for the umpteenth time. But this time, everything was different. "Selden," she said, "I can't go on like this." "What, do you want to break up with me?" I don't want this, Selden. I'm really falling in love with you, but I just can't be with someone I can't trust." "Why? What did I do to make you not trust me?" "Come on, Selden," she said. "You can't be that naive. You clearly know more about your business than you've told anyone." This anonymous call was too convenient, not to mention the missing money. I found myself between a rock and a hard place. If I don't confess, our relationship will probably end, but if I tell her everything, we might still break up, and I don't know what kind of legal trouble I might get into. I took a deep breath and decided to tell her the truth. One thing was for sure, I didn't want to lose her, and that was my only hope. "Okay, Tyler, I'll tell you everything and hope and pray that you'll want to be with me." Tyler looked a little shocked, probably thinking I was going to tell her. She then nodded for me to continue. I told her how we met, the children's reactions to our marriage, and finally, my conversation with Lucille that revealed John and Kelly's lies. I then told her about the phone cloning, confirming the scam, and how I found out about their insider trading scheme. I didn't even have to tell her about moving the money and making the call, it was obvious to her. I bowed my head, putting my face in my hands, completely exhausted and not knowing if these would be my last moments here. When I looked up, Tyler was very calm. She seemed lost in thought. "I can't say I didn't suspect something like this," she said, "but it's still a little shocking to hear it straight from you." I nodded in understanding. "I hear you," I said. "But what about us now?" "I can't say right now. I need time to digest all this. I think you should go now. I'll call you when I'm ready." I hesitated for a moment but realized that my best hope was to respect her wishes. I stood up, kissed the top of her head, and left. The next few days were the worst of my life. I both longed for and dreaded her call. I also wondered if the police would come to my home. The following Friday, the phone rang. Tyler's name was on the display. I answered the phone nervously. "Hey, Tyler," I said anxiously. "Hey, Selden. I've made some decisions. Can you come over for dinner tonight around 7? Then we can talk." "Sure, Tyler. Whatever you say." We said our goodbyes, and I hung up feeling somewhat relieved that she wanted to talk and didn't just tell me to disappear. I rang her doorbell, and she greeted me with a sweet kiss on the lips before I followed her into the kitchen. I didn't know how much appetite I'd have or if I'd be able to hold down food, but I went to the refrigerator for a can of Pepsi and sat down at the table when she shooed me away from the stove. We had a pleasant dinner with casual conversation. Luckily, it was a very light meal. I don't think I could handle anything heavy. After dinner, she let me help with the dishes. Then we went into the living room and sat on opposite ends of the couch. We sat in silence for a few minutes. I didn't want to rush her, and she obviously needed time to collect her thoughts. "Selden," she began, "I can't say I'm not disappointed that you didn't tell me all this when I took your case. I was your lawyer, you could and should have trusted me. I'm also offended that you continued to hide it when we started dating. But having said that, I sympathize with your feelings of betrayal that have made it difficult for you to open up, even to me. I also appreciate that you eventually confessed, even if I had to push you a little." She smiled at me slightly. Ultimately, my decision was quite simple. I love you, Selden, and I know that you love me. I have one condition before we continue our relationship. I hope I'm not sticking my neck out too far, but I'll do anything for you, Tyler, I said. I thought you would say that. Don't worry, I don't think you'll have a problem with it. So, what is it? I asked, the tension palpable. It's money, Selden. I don't feel comfortable holding this money. What can we do about it? There are many ways to find out who it really belongs to, I said. Actually, this is something I've been thinking about for a long time, and I think I've found the answer. What is it? Tyler asked. Money certainly doesn't do any good where it is now, I said. That was an interesting choice of words, Selden, she replied, because I was thinking about doing something good with it. Do you have anything specific in mind? I'm open to almost anything you want to do. As you know, both my parents died of cancer. I'd like to donate it to cancer research. That's a great idea, Tyler. I will begin making the necessary arrangements tomorrow morning. Tyler came over to me, sat on my lap, and kissed me deeply. I began to seriously hope that everything would be fine. So, where do we go from here? I asked. I suggest you take me to bed, she said. I was stunned. Get your thoughts out of the ditch, Selden. I just want to fall asleep in your arms. Oh, sure, I mumbled as she laughed at my reaction. We went upstairs, and she let me use the bathroom first, giving me a spare toothbrush. I used the toilet, washed my face, brushed my teeth, and was done in 10 minutes. When she came out of the bathroom, I was already lying in bed, wrapped in sheets. I just lay there with my hands behind my head, amazed at how my life had changed. Tyler soon emerged from the bathroom dressed in a skimpy nightgown. I couldn't even tell if there was anything underneath it. She climbed into bed and snuggled up to my side, placing her head on my chest and her hand on my stomach. I hugged her, pulled her closer, and kissed her forehead. I love you so much, Tyler, I said. I still can't believe you could love me, she replied. You better believe it. I wouldn't have gone through all this if I hadn't been in love, she said. She turned off the light, and although it was still early, we soon fell asleep. The next day, I began transferring money back from the Cayman Islands and making anonymous donations to various cancer research and treatment organizations. Each donation was large enough to be appreciated and useful, but not so large that it attracted unwanted attention. There was one last piece left in the puzzle that had been my life for the past couple of years. Tyler and I were sitting in the living room having our afternoon drinks when there was a gentle knock on the front door. I stood up to answer and was shocked to see Daniel and Patricia standing there, looking very nervous. Can I come in? Daniel asked. Of course, I said, puzzled. I motioned for them to come in and close the door. They followed me into the living room, and Tyler stood up. Tyler, these are my adopted children, Daniel and Patricia, I said. Startled, Tyler shook their hands. Please, she said, take a seat. Can I get you a drink? Daniel looked at Patricia, who shook her head no. I don't think we'll stay that long, he said. Okay, I said. Why are you here? We came to apologize, Daniel said. Apologize for what? I asked, my surprise evident. Patricia continued, we visited our mother yesterday. She said, I'm sure it's been hard for you, but what does that have to do with me? She told us the truth about your relationship, Daniel said. She told us that she was divorced. It was more than that, Patricia added. She also admitted that she had already cheated on her father with John Sinclair. Well, I said, I really appreciate you coming to tell me this. I'm sure this whole situation has been very difficult for you. They both nodded. Can I ask you something? I said. They looked at me and nodded. I understand your feelings towards me, especially considering what you were told. But even if it were true, your mother was not without guilt. Were you old enough to choose? Why did you stay with her and not with your father? I asked. Daniel just smiled sadly. These were more of her lies, he said. She tried to blame the scam on him. He worked too many hours, traveled a lot, and neglected her, the usual excuses. She conveniently left out the fact that she was a housewife with expensive tastes, and he had to work hard to support her lifestyle. I just shook my head as they stood up to leave. I shook hands with Daniel and briefly hugged Patricia. I have to say again that I appreciate you telling me all of this. It shows real character. If I ever need anything. Thank you, but that's really not necessary, Daniel said. Our father is in control. We have a lot of work to do to repair our relationship, but I think we will succeed. I walked them to the door, then sat back down with Tyler. Ugh, I said. That was really unexpected. Yeah, Tyler said. They seem like good kids. Yeah, I said. It's like bad news and good news. The bad news is that Kelly ruined our marriage and my relationship with my 2 good kids. And the good news? The good news is that it led me to you, I said, pushing her gently and kissing her passionately. Our tongues immediately intertwined in a duel. Before we got too far, Tyler stood up, pulling me with her. I think it would be more convenient somewhere else, she said, leading me to the bedroom. Not being a fool, I wasted no time following her. What do you think of our short story? I thought my husband did the absolute right thing by recording the conversation on his phone. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. See you in the comments.